Easter 1916. Irish rebels stormed Dublin City to gain independence from Britain. The rising fails miserably. Now, we reveal what caused the failure of the 1916 Rising. Disasters don't just happen, they're caused by a sequence of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. Europe, Ireland, Dublin City. 24th of April, 1916. Today is the combination of weeks of research and planning. The Irish rebels prepare to attack the British strongholds in Ireland in an attempt to carve out a republic. Patrick Pearse and James Connolly, the leaders, order the Easter Rising to go ahead. 16,000 soldiers stormed Dublin City, taking over multiple buildings, including the General Post Office, the Four Courts, Jacob's Biscuit Factory, and Boland's Mill. The rebels failed to take Dublin Castle, which is the centre of British rule in Ireland. On the roof of the General Post Office, Patrick Pearse reads the Proclamation of the Irish Republic, one of the most important messages in Ireland. Seconds from disaster will continue in a moment. And now back to seconds from disaster. Irish rebels start rising against Britain in an attempt to gain independence. Now Britain fights back. During the week, the British government responded to the attack. They bombed the General Post Office in an attempt to capture the leaders. This plan succeeds, and Patrick Pearse and some of the other leaders are captured. The next week, Patrick Pearse and some of the other leaders were tried and sentenced to death. So why did the Rising fail so catastrophically? Now, by rewinding the events leading up to the attack, and by going deep into the investigation, we reveal why the Rising went so disastrously wrong. Investigators first look at the possibility that the Rising had been sabotaged. They find no evidence to prove to the theory that the attack was sabotaged, and rule out sabotage as the cause of the Rising to fail. Investigators examine the planning for the Rising. They find on a number of occasions where the plan broke down. Seconds from disaster will return after this. We now return to seconds from disaster. Investigators first look at the men needed to carry out the attack. They find that Patrick Pearse sent a document to Owen McNeill, the leader of the Ulster Volunteer Force, stating that the British Army were planning on disarming the volunteers. So, unknowingly, the volunteers became part of the Rising. Then, Owen McNeill realised that the document was a forgery. He calls off the volunteers just 3 days before the Rising is set to take place. Next, in investigators look at arms needed for the attack. The rebels ask for arms from England's enemy in the war, Germany. The ship, Ode, leaves one of German ports and sets off for Ireland. This ship carries a small number of arms and some ammunition. Then, investigators find out the ship was attacked by the English army and was deliberately sunk by its captain. The rebels now have no arms and only half the men needed to have a chance of a military success. Even so, Patrick Pearse calls for the rising to go ahead anyway. Seconds from Disaster will return after this. And now back to Seconds from Disaster. Investigators now know the series of errors that led the 1916 Rising to go so catastrophically wrong. Three weeks to disaster. Patrick Pearse calls for arms from Germany and men from the Ulster Volunteer Force. 2 weeks to disaster. The Ode, containing arms for the rising, is sunk just off Kinsale. 10 days to disaster. Owen McNeill orders the Ulster Volunteer Force to stand down for the rising. 1 week to go. The rising goes ahead even though the rebels have no chance of a military success. Disaster strikes. The General Post Office is bombed and the rebel leaders are captured. British Army reported casualties of 116 dead, 368 wounded, and 9 missing. Rebel and civilian casualties were 318 dead and 2,217 wounded. All 16 police fatalities and 22 of the British soldiers killed were Irishmen. The rebel leaders were executed in the weeks after the rising.